The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. Cold drops fell from a grey sky, soaking the worn jacket of a man sitting under a broken bus shelter. Beside him, a little girl slept, her small hand gripping his sleeve. The man watched the empty road, his eyes tired but alert, as if waiting for something that would never come. His name was Daniel, a veteran who once wore medals on his chest, now holding nothing but a paper cup and fading hope. He had been strong once, proud. But life after war had stripped him bare, his home gone, his savings drained, his wife lost to illness. All he had left was his daughter, Lily. Every night, he whispered promises to her that tomorrow would be better, though he no longer believed his own words. The streets had become his battlefield, survival his only mission. Then one morning, a black car stopped in front of him. A man in a suit stepped out, holding an envelope sealed with an old red wax mark. "Are you Daniel Morris?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, suspicious, before nodding. The man handed him the letter. "It's from Mr. Edwin Clark. His passed away recently." Daniel frowned. "I don't know any Edwin Clark." The man gave a small nod. "You will," he said softly, and left. Daniel opened the letter with trembling hands. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. Asterisk to the man who once stood in the rain. "The keys are yours now. Take care of what I couldn't finish." Asterisk beneath it was an address. He read it again and again, confused. The handwriting was old, the ink faded, but something about the words felt personal, too personal. He turned to his daughter. "Lily," he whispered, "we are going somewhere." That night, as they boarded a nearly empty bus heading out of the city, Daniel looked at the letter once more. An address, a name he didn't know, and a strange sense that his life, all his years of pain and loss, was about to change forever. The road stretched endlessly through fog and farmland. Daniel stared out the window, the letter clutched tightly in his hand. Lily sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, asleep again. The rhythmic hum of the old bus was the only sound in the quiet night. He hadn't told her much, just that they were going somewhere safer, somewhere new. Truth was, he didn't know where this road would end. The address scribbled on the paper felt like a puzzle, a mystery he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Hours later, the bus stopped near a dirt road. The driver turned and said, "This is as far as I go." Daniel nodded, lifting his daughter's bag and stepping off into the cold morning air. Mist hung over the trees. There was no one around, no sound except for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a crow. He looked down the narrow path that disappeared into the forest. Somewhere down there was the address from the letter. They walked for nearly an hour. The ground was soft with mud, and branches brushed against their coats. Lily complained quietly, her small boots sinking into the earth. "Are we almost there, Daddy?" she asked. "Almost," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. Then, through the trees, he saw it, a cottage, small and half hidden behind ivy and fog. The place looked forgotten. The roof sagged, the porch was covered in leaves, and the windows were cloudy with dust. Yet there was something peaceful about it, something familiar. Daniel's breath caught as he looked closer. An old flagpole leaned near the door, its fabric torn and faded, but still showing the stars and stripes. His chest tightened. Whoever had lived here had once served, just like him. He pushed the door open. It groaned loudly, echoing through the empty rooms. Inside, the air smelled of wood, dampness, and time. A thin layer of dust covered everything. Old furniture, photographs, shelves lined with books. In the corner, a rocking chair faced a fireplace filled with ashes long gone cold. Lily ran her fingers across the table. "No one's been here for years," she said softly. Daniel walked slowly through the rooms. On one wall, a collection of medals hung inside a glass case. One caught his eye, a bronze star, the same kind he'd earned overseas. Beneath it, a black and white photograph showed a group of soldiers standing together, their faces young and proud. Daniel stepped closer, squinting. Something about one of the men made his stomach twist. The soldier in the back row had a familiar look, a certain stance, a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He'd seen that scar before. Not in a photo, but in real life. In the middle of chaos, years ago, when explosions lit up the night sky and every breath felt borrowed. He'd been pulled from the dirt by a man with that same scar. That man had saved his life. Lily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, you okay?" He blinked, nodding slowly. "Yeah," he whispered, though his voice sounded far away. He kept walking, trying to shake off the memory. In the small kitchen, he found an envelope on the counter, sealed in the same red wax as the first letter. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single key and a short message, asterisk for the basement. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. Asterisk. He hesitated before looking toward the narrow wooden door by the pantry. It creaked when he opened it, revealing a set of steep steps leading into darkness. Dust drifted through the air as he descended, his flashlight flickering across stone walls lined with old shelves. The smell of earth and oil filled the air. At the far end of the basement stood a wooden chest, large and locked. He inserted the key, and it turned easily. The hinges creaked as he lifted the lid. Inside were objects carefully wrapped in cloth, an old soldier's helmet, a folded uniform, and several letters tied together with string. He opened one. The handwriting was the same as the letter he'd received. Asterisk. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. My name is Edwin Clark. I've waited many years for peace, and perhaps this is how I find it. The man who receives this will understand. We shared a field once, a field of noise and fear. I saved a boy there. I never learned his name, but I never forgot his face. Asterisk. Daniel's throat tightened. His knees felt weak. He sank to the ground, the letter trembling in his hands. He read on. Asterisk. I searched for that boy after the war, but life has its ways of scattering us. I built this place hoping one day he might find it. If you're him, then this is my thank you, for surviving, for carrying the part of us that couldn't. Asterisk. Daniel stared at the page, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the silence. The fog outside pressed against the window like the world itself was holding its breath. Lily's voice echoed softly from upstairs. Daddy, what did you find? He looked at the letter again, then at the chest filled with memories of a man he never met but somehow knew better than anyone. The past, the war, the faces he thought he'd lost forever, they had led him here. And this house, it wasn't just an inheritance. It was a message, a reminder, and a beginning of something he didn't yet understand. The candlelight flickered across the page as Daniel read the letter again, his fingers trembling slightly. The words felt heavy, soaked with years of silence and unspoken memories. He could almost see it now, the battlefield, the smoke, the chaos, and that man with the scar who pulled him out of the mud. A stranger back then, but the reason he was alive today. And that stranger's name was Edwin Clark, the man who had just given him this house. He leaned back against the cold wall of the basement, staring at the old chest filled with Edwin's belongings. Each piece told a story, a faded photograph of young soldiers smiling through exhaustion, a rusted dog tag, a watch with a cracked glass face. Everything felt sacred, like fragments of a life that had waited decades to be remembered. Lily's small footsteps echoed from above. Daddy, it's getting dark. Her voice was soft, almost afraid. He folded the letter and climbed the stairs slowly, the wooden steps creaking beneath his boots. She was sitting by the window, hugging her backpack. He smiled faintly. I found something, he said, about the man who owned this place. What kind of something? She asked, eyes wide. A secret, he replied quietly. A good one. They lit a fire in the old hearth that night. The flames danced across the room, painting warm light on the faded wallpaper. Daniel sat quietly, staring into the fire. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. He found himself thinking about Edwin, not as a stranger, but as someone who had been there all along. The more he explored the house, the more connections he found. The books on the shelves were the same titles he remembered reading during his service. The worn blanket on the bed had an embroidered military insignia, almost identical to the one on his own old uniform. It was as if Edwin had been waiting for him, even after death. The next morning, Daniel started cleaning the house. Lily helped him, sweeping dust from the floor, opening the windows, letting the sunlight pour in. Every corner revealed a new memory, a letter tucked behind a picture frame, a newspaper article about a missing platoon, an old radio still working when he turned the knob. He discovered a small journal under the bed. The first page read, asterisk for the one who remembers. Asterisk as he turned the pages, Daniel realized it was Edwin's personal diary, written during his final years. Each entry carried a mixture of guilt, longing, and hope. The old man wrote about the soldiers he couldn't save, the faces he couldn't forget, and the dream of building a place where peace could finally live. One page stood out. It said, Asterisk, if the boy ever finds this house, he'll understand. The past can destroy you if you let it, or rebuild you if you face it. Asterisk, Daniel felt his throat tighten. He looked around at the cottage, its quiet walls holding decades of pain and redemption. You found me, he whispered under his breath. And I found you. Later that day, Lily wandered outside. Daddy, look, she called. He followed her voice to the garden, where she was pointing at a small wooden cross hidden behind overgrown vines. Kneeling beside it, he brushed away the dirt and read the inscription, asterisk, in memory of those who never came home. Asterisk, there were names carved underneath. Some he recognized. Some he didn't. His chest ached as he ran his fingers over each letter, each life remembered in silence. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire again, reading Edwin's last few diary entries. The old man had written about loneliness, about living too long with ghosts, and about leaving something behind that mattered. One line struck Daniel the most, asterisk, no man truly dies if someone remembers his story. Asterisk, he looked toward Lily, asleep on the couch, her face peaceful in the glow of the fire. Maybe that was the real inheritance, not the house, not the land, but the story itself. A story of two soldiers, decades apart, bound by one act of courage and one unspoken promise. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not sadness. Not even relief. It was purpose, the quiet, steady kind that comes when you finally understand why you've survived. The morning air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet soil. Daniel stepped outside the cottage, the letter still in his pocket. The mist clung to the fields, and the world seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about where to sleep or how to make it through the day. He was thinking about what this place could become. The cottage wasn't just shelter anymore, it was a second chance. He started fixing the porch first. The wood was soft and splintered, every nail rusted deep into the grain. As he worked, Lily brought him tools, humming softly to herself. It's like fixing a puzzle, she said with a grin. He smiled. Yeah, he replied, a really old puzzle. There was laughter in his voice, a sound that had been missing for far too long. Over the next few weeks, the house began to change. The broken windows were replaced with glass from a shed, the garden was cleared of weeds, and the chimney finally released smoke again. The neighbors, at first wary of the newcomer, began to notice. A man named Henry, who lived down the road, stopped by one morning with coffee. Heard someone's breathing life back into the Clark place, he said, tipping his hat. Daniel nodded. Just trying to keep it standing, he said, but Henry smiled knowingly. That old man always said he was saving it for someone. Guess that someone's you. The words stayed with Daniel. Each hammer strike felt heavier now, each board he replaced more meaningful. He wasn't just restoring a cottage, he was rebuilding a promise that started decades before he even knew it existed. Inside, he turned one of the empty rooms into a small study. He lined the walls with Edwin's books and framed the old photographs he found in the attic. In one, Edwin stood beside the same locomotive that Daniel had once ridden home from the war. Another photo showed Edwin smiling beside a group of soldiers, and for the first time, Daniel noticed a small figure in the corner, himself, younger, dirt-covered, and unaware of the man who would one day save him again. Sometimes, at night, when the fire burned low, Daniel talked to Edwin out loud. He'd sit in a rocking chair, the one Edwin must have used, and tell him about the repairs, about Lily, about the small victories of every day. It felt strange at first, but comforting. You gave me more than a house, he whispered one night. You gave me something to build on. Lily had started school at the nearby town by then. Her teacher called Daniel one afternoon to say she'd written an essay titled Asterisk, The Cottage of Heroes. Asterisk in it, she described her father as the man who turned old ghosts into a home. Daniel didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He did both. One day, as he was clearing out the shed behind the house, he found a rusted box under the floorboards. Inside were newspaper clippings, receipts, and a faded photograph of a small group of men standing in front of a half-built cabin. On the back, in Edwin's handwriting, were the words, asterisk for them. Always for them. Asterisk that night, Daniel couldn't shake the thought. The way the land sloped gently toward the woods, the open space, it all seemed meant for something more. He started thinking bigger. Maybe this wasn't just meant for him and Lily. Maybe Edwin had wanted others to find peace here too. He began sketching ideas on old scraps of paper, simple plans for small cabins, a communal garden, maybe even a workshop where veterans could learn to build and fix things. It felt impossible, but then again, so had everything else that had brought him here. A few weeks later, he wrote a letter to the local veterans group, explaining what he wanted to do. He didn't expect a response. But 3 days later, one came. Then another. Then more. Men and women who had once worn the same uniform began showing up, some with tools, some with stories, some just looking for quiet. Together, they started working on the land, clearing brush, rebuilding fences, fixing what time had broken. Lily ran between them, laughing, handing out lemonade. The air was filled with the sound of hammers, saws, and conversation. For the first time, Daniel saw life where there had once been silence. As the sun set that evening, he stood on the porch, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys of the new cabins. The valley glowed in warm orange light, and he could almost feel Edwin's presence beside him, quiet and proud. "You were right," Daniel said softly, looking toward the old flag that now hung straight and strong again. "Some things shouldn't be forgotten." He turned toward the cottage, the laughter of veterans echoing behind him, and realized the truth. What Edwin had left him wasn't just a home. It was the beginning of something greater, something meant to heal others just as it had healed him. Winter came quietly that year, settling over the valley like a thick white blanket. Snow gathered on the rooftops and rested softly on the branches of the pine trees that surrounded the cottage. Smoke rose steadily from the chimneys, curling into the grey sky. Daniel stood on the porch, his breath visible in the cold air, watching the world he'd helped rebuild. The cottage no longer looked abandoned, it looked alive. The sound of laughter drifted from the cabins in the distance where other veterans now lived. He could hear the faint ring of a hammer, the bark of a dog, the creak of a gate swinging in the wind. It was peaceful, and it felt earned. He sipped his coffee slowly, the mug warm against his hands. Lily came running from the path, her cheeks red from the cold. "Dad, it's snowing harder near the workshop," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. He smiled, pulling his scarf tighter. "Then let's make sure no one's freezing in there," he said, following her footprints across the yard. Inside the workshop, the fire crackled in the stove as 3 men worked on repairing old furniture for the cabins. "Morning, boss," one of them called out, grinning. Daniel shook his head. "Don't call me that," he said, smiling despite himself. They'd been calling him that for weeks now, ever since the project had turned into something bigger, a place for veterans to work, live, and find purpose again. A place they called *Clarkshaven*, named in honor of the man who had started it all without ever knowing how far his kindness would reach. On the wall above the main workbench hung a framed photograph of Edwin Clark, the 96-year-old veteran whose legacy had brought them here. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, *He built peace where others built walls. Every time Daniel looked at it, he felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and quiet pride. By afternoon, the snow was falling harder. Daniel and the others spent the rest of the day making sure the fires in each cabin stayed strong. In the evening, everyone gathered in the main hall, a wide, open room that had once been Edwin's barn. Now it was filled with long tables, lanterns, and the smell of soup cooking over an open fire. Laughter filled the space. Stories too, stories of the past, of battles survived, and of the strange peace they'd all found here. When the night grew late, Daniel stood and looked around the room. He didn't say anything, but his eyes met the faces of the people who had once been strangers. He saw the same look in each of them, the quiet recognition of someone who had been broken and had chosen to rebuild. After everyone had gone to bed, Daniel walked outside. The snow was still falling, gentle and silent. The old flag by the porch fluttered slightly in the wind. He stopped near the small garden where the wooden cross stood. The inscription had faded slightly, but he knew every word by heart, in memory of those who never came home. He brushed the snow from the top of the cross, his breath steady in the cold. "You did it, Edwin," he said softly. "They came home after all." A faint crunch of snow behind him made him turn. It was Lily, bundled in her coat, holding a candle. "Mom used to say we should always keep one light on," she said, "so no one feels lost." He crouched beside her, helping her place the candle at the base of the cross. The flame flickered against the wind but didn't go out. "She was right," he said. "We'll keep it burning." The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the faint sound of the whistle from the nearby train tracks. It wasn't close, but it echoed faintly, steady, comforting. Daniel listened, closing his eyes for a moment. The sound reminded him of the nights he'd spent in the war, of the loneliness that followed, and of how far he had come from that broken man sitting under a bus shelter with nothing but hope and his daughter. He opened his eyes again and looked toward the horizon. The sun was starting to rise behind the clouds, turning the snow a soft gold. Lily's hand found his, small and warm in the freezing air. Behind them, the chimneys of Clark's Haven puffed steady smoke into the morning sky. Inside, fires burned, coffee brewed, and voices began to stir. The world was waking up again. Daniel squeezed his daughter's hand gently and whispered, "Looks like another good day to start over." The cottage stood tall against the snow, its windows glowing faintly with warmth. For the first time in his life, Daniel didn't wonder where home was. He was standing in it.